Hi, my name is Katie Weatherup, as you probably know if you're watching this, and I want to give a little bit of wisdom for people about making your home as energetically supportive and wonderful as possible. So I think this is a great practice for anyone. I think that energetically sensitive people benefit the most from a aligned, congruent, supportive environment with the right things around them. And I think that there's some ways that this is a little bit harder for energetically sensitive people. So I want to talk a little bit about that because if you're in the sheltered home situation, then you're in really, really deep relationship with your home. And one of the things, I was watching a comedian and he was talking about like the the problems that couples have and like the new vows we may come up with, like I'm down with hanging out with you for a couple hours a day, but this, being together 24/7 may be putting a strain on some people's relationships because the amount of togetherness that's the perfect amount of togetherness may be not what they have. And so in this time, if you are in shelter at home, you may be having a much more intense and connected relationship with your home space and with your belongings, and there may be some friction of things that aren't aligned. And so I think Marie Kondo, she has a delightful Netflix series. She has a really good book. There's lots and lots of wisdom on going through. But what I love about her program is just really checking in with each and every one of your belongings and seeing if it's a contemporary hell yes to being in your life. She talks about things bringing you joy, but I would say that when we're contemporary with our things and our belongings and they're really the right thing for exactly who we are now, that's super helpful. One of the things that's interesting that they've done studies about is we have a sunk cost cognitive bias, which means that we value things that we pay money for more. So if we were going to choose to go out and buy something, we might not buy it, but we might hang on to it because of the costs that we sunk into it. So there's some psychological things we have to overcome when we're looking at like, do I really truly feel aligned with continuing to have the things I have? Because it costs energy. The more belongings you have, sometimes that can mean you're paying to store them. So we literally can pay money, we pay in opportunity costs of new things we can't bring in. We can't assimilate new things if we're already completely saturated. So our belongings, there's a lot of overhead to taking care of them. Back in the day, there were lots of people who lived their lives with only what they and a horse could carry effectively. And in the modern world, a lot of us have a lot of things, and it's wonderful. I love that I get to have pieces of, beautiful jewelry made with Herkimers and all these rocks and crystals, but at some point it can become overly loud. And one of the more interesting moments in my journey was when I wasn't rearranging my grid of personal stones, and so it was holding on to energy stagnation. It was outdated. And so finally, I got it together. I took all my rocks outside, I cleansed them, I saged them, and then I started asking who wants to stay with me, and a good third to a half were complete with me. And I was quite unhappy about this because I really, really still love some of them. And what the guide said is like, well, of course you're at choice. You can hang on to these, but every single crystal you brought home has its own vibration, has its own energy, and it's just kind of making it loud, whereas there are crystals that have a really deep purpose for things they can support you with, and there are other crystals that you've mastered those lessons you've learned. So some of the crystals that were my very first crystals ever more than 20 years ago when I started on my journey were just done because I wasn't in the 101 let me learn to sense my energy place. And yet they were adding their powerful vibration, and it was just making it not so that I could really get the juice out of the crystals. Another way to look at this would be social circles as an analogy. If you want to go deep with people, they're going to be a limited number. They're just a finite number of people. that you can go deep and over time. Like I feel like I go deep with lots of people, even if I only work with them once for a session. But there's a real finite number of people who I can track their journey and remember what they're up to and remember their hopes and their dreams and their fears, as opposed to the people who I connect with when the energy aligns. And it's just, I'm very choosy about the slots and the alignment for the people who I consider inner circle, because it's such a finite resource. It takes time and overhead. And when people try to have relationships with lots and lots and lots of people, they can end up with that sort of alone in a crowd feeling, because there isn't the ability to have the depth and intimacy that comes with consistent amounts of time and depth all at the same time. So with belongings, if you have lots of them, you may be not enjoying them as fully as possible. They may be adding old energy that's no longer needed. And they may be anchoring a previous version of yourself. I have a little bit of problem with stagnation. I resist change. I've got, like a moon in Taurus, if that means anything to you. But there's just some real, I like things once I get them set to stay that way. I like closure. And so when I'm dealing with things that aren't that, there can be this, this tension, and I don't want my space to kind of amplify something that I work very hard with, breath work and movement and shamanic work and all these things, to overcome this limitation that doesn't serve me when it's taken to excess. It'll have me stay in not very good situations or relationships way too long in resistance to change. So I want my environment to help me move me toward the most contemporary, aligned version of myself, not hamper me. And so there's a lot of thoughtfulness. And one of the best things that a really aligned environment can do for an energetically sensitive person is it can give you this amazing filter from the world. So goodness, it's psychically noisy right now. It is really, really, really loud. We live in a society, most of us, that doesn't really have high levels of prizing of emotional intelligence and emotional development. You kind of have to leave the beaten path if you want to work with those aspects. And so when the pot is stirred, there's some really, really triggered people who have not given time and energy to their ability to be with fear or to be with uncertainty or those kind of things. And they're in the collective being really loud now. So you want your home to damp out the loudness from outside. So for the same reason we really like screens and windows and doors that close properly and insulation and all those kind of things, because it allows us to have a physical engagement with the outside world that's really aligned. If there's snow outside, you don't want an open window. You don't want a gap that you can't close. But on a beautiful spring day, you absolutely do. And similarly, energetically, we want to control and filter the energy so that even if it's really loud and chaotic and people are freaking out and losing their minds, we can be in this, quiet, peaceful place. So, I want to offer this, that tending your home, tending the energetics of your home so it's clean and light and protected and really a sanctuary, is very helpful for people who are energetically sensitive, because it's a disability in a lot of ways to be so much more energetically sensitive. I'll just be honest, it costs me more energy than someone who is not, to go to the grocery store, and I get dizzy sometimes in IKEA if I'm not really on my game of filtering. And that just makes it harder to move through the world. And I have a lot of really great ways to manage it, and I'm not in a like, oh, woe is me, but I'm incredibly aware that if my energetic sensitivity isn't managed, the way the world moves on its own is very disruptive to my well-being. And so a critical part of that is having a home environment where I don't have to filter the loudness of the world, where things are clear and clean and congruent and peaceful. So all the parts of me that get overstimulated in places where there are lots of people running around get to have some good rest. They get to like be soothed and calmed. And then I have the opportunity, to be fresh when I go out into the world, or I go to an airport, or I have these kind of experiences. You'd think with all the social distancing and things shut down, it would be quieter right now, but it's loud. People are dealing with their stuff. So tending your home is really, really high value. I would say that energetically sensitive people get so much more out of an aligned home environment than the average person. Now, somebody with really strong artistic sensibilities or sensitivity to environment as a different axis than energy, probably similar, but in general, compared to most of the population, we do better with good environments. And the other part of that is it can be so much harder for an energetically sensitive person to navigate their complexity of getting their environment there. And the reason for this is we feel the energy. So when we start opening boxes of old papers, we can get mired in the energy of the past and the things that we were experiencing. So it can actually be harder to put our house in order, even though we benefit more from having only the things that are really supportive around us. So it can be even more uphill, because I used to try to do this, and I'd pull everything out and they'd be in my living room, and at some point I'd be sitting in my living room overwhelmed by the energy, staring at the chaos, really, really over it, and just mired in the energetic aspect. And so I want to remind you and invite you that if you're really resonating with this, you're like, yeah, now is the right time to come into right relationship with my home, to come into right relationship with my belongings, to do some of that postponed clean out whatever cabinets or drawers or closets or garages that maybe you just didn't get to in the fullness of life. If this is resonating for you and you're someone who also is sensitive to energy, just get out your smudging supplies. Make sure that you have your sage or your Palo Santo or your essential oil sprays or whatever it is, and take breaks and do fire ceremony to release the patterning. That's you can find that under the resources tab of my website on the articles page, is how to do fire ceremony. But give yourself this energetic support proactively, like set a timer so every 15 minutes you take some breaths and whoosh some energy around, whatever your practices are. Because that way you'll have a lot more staying power for getting through this if you're tending the energy. And unsurprisingly, I have an offer. I'm doing my House to Haven program, which is a 5-week program. If you feel called, I would love to share this. I'm offering it at 75% off the price, because these COVID times are weird and crazy. So you're paying 25% of what this program originally cost, and you get to be in sacred space for 5 weeks. And it's just me going in every week and doing journey work and sort of taking out the energy. So I'll be doing clearing on your space and supporting the destiny path of you putting things in order. Plus, you're going to get weekly content of all my recordings and offers and suggestions for how to make this process graceful, because there's a lot out there on decluttering, but there isn't necessarily that much out there on decluttering and the tending of the energy for people who are awake at that level, who are intuitive, who are sensitive to their environment. There's a fair bit out there on space clearing. I think that there's lots and lots of good, like how to cleanse your space, and that's cool. I love that. But that's only this one tiny aspect of how to have an energetically aligned space. And I would love to support you in a little bit of a deep dive on that. And you can dive really deep. You can aspire to go through everything you own in that 5-week period and really work with the energy and get your ward set up and have everything in really, really good shape. Or you can do a lighter version. You can move some parts of it, and you'll be getting my work shamanically in the background with my team of guides to help tend and support all of this. So I hope there's value in this. Even if you don't work with me, I really hope that you'll consider working on this part of your life, because I think it makes such a difference. And if you do work with me, that would be wonderful. The program House to Haven kicks off on Wednesday, and I hope you'll consider joining me. So thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Katie Weatherup, and you can learn more about me and my work at my website, which is handsoverheart.com.